got sunshine today. Trouble is, everything's frozen up, including my joints, I think. Well, welcome this morning. We're good. If you turn with me, please, to chapter 41 in the book of Genesis. We'll continue our study there. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. The Lord keeps Joseph in the prison school for 2 more years. At this point, Joseph has been in Egypt for 13 years. He's now ready to become the savior of his family and also Egypt. And he is a picture of a greater Savior of the people, Jesus Christ. Both of them began their ministries at the age of 30. The occasion that will bring about the next change in Joseph's life is a dream that God gives to Pharaoh. The dream is given to us and deals with the river Nile. God emphasizes the dream to Pharaoh by giving it to him in 2 different forms on the same night. And then as we read the dream, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed. And they fed in a meadow, and behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and the lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream. But there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Many of our own dreams can barely be remembered upon our awaking. But these 2 dreams are clear to Pharaoh that they have something important meaning. Therefore, he calls upon all the men of Egypt who have been trained in dream interpretation, but they are unable to make any understandable meaning from them. As we'll later see, excuse me, it's a good thing that the wise men and magicians could not come up with a reasonable interpretation that Pharaoh could possibly believe, because the right actions needed to be taken immediately. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Meanwhile, the chief butler is standing by, ready to serve Pharaoh, and he overhears all that is taking place. When he sees that the wise men and magicians cannot come up with an interpretation for the dreams, he remembers his dream, along with the bakers, and the correct interpretations given to him by Joseph. He confesses his forgetfulness and relates his prison experience to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. Well, hearing that there's someone who could possibly interpret his dreams, Pharaoh issues an order to bring Joseph to him as soon as possible. Great speed is taken to get Joseph to Pharaoh, but time was taken to make himself presentable. They would have washed him to remove the prison smells. They shave him because beards were considered to be unhygienic. The beards we see in pictures of Pharaoh were actually fake metal beards that were attached just for the show of it. His hair would have been trimmed to a length appropriate to his age. While we often see pictures of Egyptians with shaved heads, this was only common among certain groups, such as young boys. In practice, some Egyptians actually wore wigs. He was given clothing that would be appropriate in which to stand before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. When Joseph comes into Pharaoh, Pharaoh gets right down to business. These dreams are very important to him. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Joseph confesses that he has no ability in himself to interpret dreams, but that God will give the interpretation to Pharaoh so that he can have peace of mind. This reminds me of Jesus' statement in John 8:32. He says, And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. The truth here will free Pharaoh's worries about what the dreams actually meant. And Pharaoh repeats the dreams for Joseph. A lot of repetition here. Of course, repetition is one of the ways in which people learn over and over and over. In fact, when I tell certain stories, they just keep repetition over and over. And by the end of the story, anybody that's listening to it can come right back and almost tell the story then. And so he says again to him, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. And behold, there came out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored. And they fed, where? In the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and ill, very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 kine, fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. So Joseph begins the interpretation. The first aspect is that both dreams that Pharaoh had are actually the same dream, just with different characters. One fauna and the other flora. Since both animals and plants will be affected by what will happen. This is an indication of how widespread the effect of what will take place will be for Egypt. The second point that Joseph makes is that this dream came from God to warn Pharaoh about what he was going to do. God does not need to tell us what he intends to do, but in his grace, he often allows us to prepare by giving warnings. The lesson I see in it is that we have a God that is too high and wonderful for us to know. But God is pleased to reveal to us all that we can understand about him. This is particularly seen in Jesus Christ, when God was pleased to become a man and live among mankind. The gospel contains God's warning to mankind and reveals to us the way to prepare for the disaster to all those who refuse to heed his warning and to shun the way of escape. In this particular case, the Lord is working out the salvation for Israel, which will occur 8 to 14 years later. Then he goes and repeats part of the dreams. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. And the dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. So the third and fourth points in the interpretation is that there will be 7 plenteous years in Egypt, and that then there will be followed by 7 disastrous years of famine. For that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. The fifth part of the interpretation is that since God gave Pharaoh 2 of the same dreams, this meant that it was a sure thing and that it would shortly come to pass, and that action needed to be taken immediately. Now, he says, let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Along with the interpretation, Joseph advises Pharaoh concerning the action that needed to be taken. First, Pharaoh needed to choose a man to lead in the preparation. This man needed to be discreet, meaning he had to have certain mental abilities to be able to handle this job. He needed to know what he was doing. Next, this man had to be wise. Every job has unexpected things that occur during it. This man needed to be able to determine what actions were needed to be able to solve those problems right away. As time passes, we will see Joseph exercise these two abilities. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land and take up the fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. After selecting an appropriate leader, the leader needed to select a staff to follow his directives. The major directive would be to gather 1/5 or 20% of all the food grown in Egypt during the 7 good years. This is the foundation of modern taxation. During the reign of European monarchs, it was also known as the king's fifth. Everything that the explorers would find, they had to give 1/5 of it to the monarch. When certain people were granted land to use, every year they had to pay 1/5 of their crops that came in to the monarch. Now, fortunately, we're still about 20%. When you start calculating those, some of us are paying a whole lot more than the 20%, but that was what was determined in this case. And he said to them, let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. After collecting the food, it had to be stored securely. All the power invested in Pharaoh was used to protect the storehouses. The storehouses also had to be placed where it would be easily accessible when it was needed. This is the directive that Joseph gives to Pharaoh. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. With successful preparation, the land of Egypt would survive through this disastrous time. It would become a safe haven later on for Jacob's family. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Joseph's successful presentation is seen as the proper things to do. Pharaoh and his advisors all concur that this is what they will do. But there's still one question to be answered. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? Who should we choose to be the food czar? Remember here that Pharaoh does not know the Lord. But what he does know is that he needs someone special for this job. Someone who is led by a higher power than just the desire to be promoted into a higher position. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. God leads Pharaoh to see all the qualities that are needed for the job in Joseph. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. Joseph has been set up previously as the overseer of Potiphar's household. He's been set up as the overseer of the royal prison. And now he's set up as the overseer of all Egypt. He's granted the authority to issue directives needed to execute his duties, especially the storing of foodstuffs for the coming famine. The only limit that's set on his power is that he cannot overrule any edicts that are pronounced by Pharaoh. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Symbols of authority are now given to Joseph, so that everyone will recognize who he is and give him the proper respect and obedience that is required for his office. First, he's given Pharaoh's signet ring. With this ring, he could make and sign any contract needed for his work. It would be as if Pharaoh had signed it himself. Next, he's given clothing that sets him apart from any other officer of Pharaoh. These clothes would make him immediately recognizable. Third, he's given the second chariot to use for transportation. This chariot would be decorated with all the royal symbols used only by Pharaoh. Fourth, he was given forerunners to announce his coming and tell people to bow down to him. Fifth, he was given a special name. His name meant he who deciphered the hidden. This description of Joseph would inspire fear or awe among the people and help prevent them from trying to hide things from him, like trying to skim off over the 20% that he was supposed to be collecting. Sixth, he was given a wife from a high-ranking priestly family. On is associated with the city of Hierapolis, which was the center of worship of the sun god Ra. Later we'll see an effect of this relationship with the priests. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Joseph, being now fully equipped, sets off on his mission to save Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by handfuls. God is faithful to the promise made to Pharaoh in the dreams. Each crop at harvest time produces more than anyone could reasonably expect. Even after giving Pharaoh his 20% of the crop, there was plenty for the people to have for themselves. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years, which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities The food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. Well, storehouses had to be built. And so that's part of the job that he had. And then after that, they had to gather all the food each year. Joseph's ministers do their jobs wisely. A fifth of each crop is collected and put into storehouses in every city. Notice that this was done with equity. The food grown by the people of a particular area was stored in their city, so that they would know that they then would have access to it when it was needed. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. There was so much food being gathered into the storehouses that the accountants could no longer keep track of how much there actually was. All they knew was there was going to be more than enough. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asnath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bare unto him. During the years of plenty, God gives Joseph 2 sons. We are not told, but I would think that we can assume that Joseph has instructed his idol-worshiping wife in the ways of the Lord. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God said, He hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Joseph has now been in Egypt for 20 years. He's now settled. He has a good job and a family, and has peace of mind about all the previous treatment that he has had, not only in Egypt, but also by his brothers back in Canaan. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. The Lord brings an end to the years of plenty. Instead of the necessary rain, especially in the southern regions of the Nile River Valley, there is constant drought everywhere. Lands to the east and west likewise see very little rain, so that crops that do grow do not produce enough food. People try their best to grow something in the first year, but soon they need food. And the only place that has any food stored up is in Egypt. And when the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. Hungry people start to complain. They complain to their leader, Pharaoh, who owns all the stored food. His reply is simply, Go to Joseph, and he'll tell you how to get food. And the famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. There was not going to be any free food to give away. Those who wanted food would have to pay. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. Since there was more than enough for the Egyptians, Joseph was willing to sell to the people in the surrounding countries. So they also came to buy. If this was the first time that you had heard this story, there would be things that you would start thinking about now, such as, we know who lives in a nearby country. Who? Yeah, Jacob and his families. Will they come to Egypt to buy food? And how will they react when they see Joseph? I mean, we all have been through this at least once in our lifetime. So we have some answers to those questions. But if you don't, come back next week for the next installment in this story. Now, we're way early. Do you have any questions about anything that we've studied so far that have come to your mind? And I will try to answer them biblically. I thought this would take a little longer, but we got 4 extra minutes at the beginning, so. Yes, Dawn.
Okay, now Joseph married an Egyptian.
Joseph married an Egyptian, yes.
But God, whenever his people came out of Egypt, didn't want them to intermarry with everybody. So the covenant that God gave the Israelites wasn't in effect whenever Joseph was given this wife, right?
True, but if you look carefully at who they were not to marry, they were not to marry the Canaanite people. And if you studied throughout the rest of the scriptures, one of the statements in the law is that Israelite was not to hate an Egyptian because they had provided the place of salvation from this famine and had provided, a good 400 years for them in that land. And it was only when the Pharaoh who knew not of Joseph came in that was the reasoning then, or the cause that allowed them to get out of Egypt and go into the promised land where they were supposed to be. Any other questions? Did that answer your question? Yeah. I had already thought about that this morning before you asked it. Anything else? If not, you got extra time to prepare for the next service.
Right. Go out, as long as it doesn't start, you're okay. But if you get somewhere,
Yeah, it's very salty in there.
it's never
Linda.
Very proud this morning. Okay, is that what? Yeah, live in Worthington.
I guess test your battery.
Yeah, that's what we were just saying, you know? 'Tis the season for smartphone.
But you had a new battery, so yours didn't die on you.
No, it started right up.